7:58 a.m. The cold was a physical thing, a presence with teeth. It bit at Alara's cheeks, tiny needles of ice that made the tears welling in her eyes feel hot by comparison. She stood on the shoulder of Route 4, a strip of asphalt that was more patch than pavement, her small hand clutching the strap of her worn unicorn backpack. Her school bus, a yellow giant that usually smelled of vinyl and pencil shavings, was a distant, shrinking rectangle. It had shuddered past her stop without slowing, its red lights dormant, the driver never even glancing her way. Now there was only the sound of the wind whistling through the bare branches of the pines that lined the road, a lonely, high-pitched song. Her mother, Anya, wouldn't know for another hour. Anya would be at the diner, pouring coffee, her smile practiced and tired, assuming Alara was safe in her first-grade classroom, tracing letters and learning numbers. Alara's world had shrunk to the gravel at her feet and the gray, unforgiving sky. She took a step, then another, her breath pluming in front of her face in a series of tiny, panicked clouds. The walk home was 2 miles. 2 miles of wind and shivering. It was then that she saw it. Not a thing but a collection of wrong things. A slash of chrome against the dead brown leaves in the ditch. A smear of dark oil on the frosty grass. A shape large and still that didn't belong. It was a motorcycle, a huge, black machine lying on its side like a fallen animal. Its front wheel was twisted at an impossible angle, spokes glinting like broken teeth. And beside it, half tucked beneath the heavy frame, was a man. He was a mountain in black leather, unmoving. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the numbness of her fingers. Her first instinct was to run, to turn back toward the imagined safety of the road. But something held her. It was the silence. The world was too quiet. There was no engine groan, no shouting, no sirens. There was just the man and the wind. She crept closer, her worn sneakers making no sound on the soft earth. One of his boots was off, lying several feet away. A thick, gloved hand was outstretched, fingers slightly curled, as if reaching for something. His helmet, a dark, glossy shell, was still on, its visor hiding his face. But she could see a spider web of cracks fracturing its surface. She saw the red, a small, dark pool soaking into the collar of his leather jacket, startlingly bright against the black. She didn't know what to do. She was 7 years old. Her mother had told her never to talk to strangers, but she had also told her to always help someone who was hurt. She looked back at the empty road. No cars. No help. She took another step, close enough now to hear a sound. A faint, ragged gurgle that matched the rise and fall of his broad back. He was breathing. Alara slipped off her backpack, her fingers clumsy with cold. She unzipped the main pocket and pulled out the scarf her grandmother had knitted for her. It was bright pink, decorated with clumsy, lovable pom-poms. It was her favorite thing. She gently, carefully, laid the scarf over the man's outstretched hand, the vibrant pink a stark contrast to the grim scene. Then she took off her own thin coat, the one that was a size too small, and draped it over his shoulder, a tiny patch of warmth against the vast, cold leather. It was a child's gesture, small and inadequate, but it was all she had to give. She stood there, shivering in her thin sweater, a small, solitary guardian, watching the road and waiting. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Finally, a car approached, a sleek, black sedan. It slowed, the window rolling down. She saw a man in a suit, his face pale and angry. He looked at her, then at the man in the ditch, and his expression tightened. He didn't stop. The window rolled up, and the car accelerated, spitting gravel as it sped away. The silence returned, heavier this time. Alara just stood, her small form a testament to a promise she didn't know she was making. Her gaze fixed on the road, waiting for a different kind of car, a better kind of stranger. The first official vehicle to arrive was not an ambulance. It was Sheriff Brody's cruiser, rolling to a stop with a crunch of tires on gravel. Brody emerged, a large man whose uniform seemed perpetually strained at the seams. He surveyed the scene with an air of weary impatience, his eyes sweeping over the wrecked bike, the man on the ground, and finally settling on the shivering child. "Well, what have we got here?" he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. Anya arrived moments later, her old sedan skidding to a halt behind the cruiser. She had gotten the call from a neighbor who had driven past. She ran to Alara, her face a mask of terror and relief, wrapping her daughter in a frantic embrace. "I tried to tell him," Alara whispered into her mother's coat, her voice trembling. "I tried to tell him about the other car." Anya held her daughter tight, then looked at the sheriff. "My daughter saw what happened," she said. "Another car?" Brody cut her off with a raised hand, his expression dismissive. "Ma'am, I've seen this 100 times. Guy on a big bike going too fast for this road. Takes the curve wrong, loses control. A tragedy, but not a mystery." He gestured vaguely at the motorcycle. "These things are donor cycles for a reason." He hadn't looked for other tire marks. He hadn't asked a single question about another vehicle. He knelt beside the biker, not with concern, but with the perfunctory air of a man filling out a report in his head. The paramedics arrived, their movements crisp and efficient, a stark contrast to the sheriff's lethargy. As they worked, Brody took out his notepad. "Your girl was here when it happened?" he asked Anya, his tone implying Alara was a complication, not a witness. "She saw another car," Anya insisted, her voice gaining a sharp edge of indignation. "A black sedan. It slowed down and then drove off." Brody sighed, a theatrical display of exhausted patience. "Ma'am, kids, they see things. Their imagination gets going, especially after a scare. There are no other skid marks. The debris pattern is consistent with a single vehicle loss of control." He wasn't investigating. He was closing a file that hadn't even been opened yet. He saw a biker, and his mind filled in the rest with a story he already believed. Reckless, irresponsible, alone. Anya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. It was the cold certainty of being invisible, of her daughter's words being treated as nothing more than childish fantasy. She watched as they loaded the biker onto a backboard, his body unnervingly still. She saw the pink scarf, Alara's scarf, still resting on his gloved hand. One of the paramedics gently removed it and handed it to Anya. The wool was damp and cold. Brody's final words to her were a pat dismissal. "You should get your girl home. She's had a shock. I'll have someone call you if we need a statement, but I doubt we will." He didn't take her name. He didn't take her number. To him, they were just part of the scenery, as irrelevant as the frost on the grass. As Anya led a trembling Alara back to their car, the world felt tilted, its rules suddenly arbitrary and cruel. The truth, she realized, wasn't something that existed on its own. It had to be seen and heard by people who were willing to listen. And Sheriff Brody was not listening. Their apartment was on the 3rd floor of a tired brick building that smelled of dust and boiled cabbage. It was small, just 2 rooms and a kitchenette, but Anya had filled it with a fierce, protective warmth. The furniture was second-hand and worn, but the throw pillows were plump, the blankets were soft, and every surface was clean. On the wall above the sagging couch, Alara's drawings were taped in a chaotic, colorful collage. They were pictures of smiling suns, lopsided houses, and a recurring unicorn with a rainbow mane. This was their sanctuary, the small space they had carved out against a world that was often indifferent. Anya worked 2 jobs, mornings at the diner, evenings cleaning offices downtown. Her hands were perpetually chapped, her shoulders ached with a permanent weariness, but her focus was singular, Alara. She was raising her daughter to be kind, to be honest, and to believe that her voice mattered, a lesson that felt bitterly ironic after the morning's encounter with Sheriff Brody. That afternoon, the apartment was quiet. Alara sat at the small kitchen table, a blank piece of paper in front of her, crayons scattered like fallen soldiers. She wasn't drawing. She was just staring at the paper, her small face pale and pinched. The unicorn backpack sat by the door, looking forlorn. Anya watched her, her heart a tight knot in her chest. The little girl who found joy in everything, who chattered endlessly about clouds that looked like dragons and squirrels with important business, was gone. In her place was this silent, haunted child, Anya knelt beside her chair. "Honey, do you want to talk about it?" Alara shook her head, her gaze fixed on the crayon in her hand. "He didn't listen," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The policeman. He didn't believe me." Anya smoothed her daughter's hair, fighting back a wave of helpless anger. "I know, sweetie, but you told the truth. That's what's important. You did the right thing." But even as she said the words, they tasted like ash in her mouth. What good was the truth if no one would hear it? The next day, Anya saw the small article in the local paper. A single paragraph on page 6, under the headline "Motorcyclist Injured in Route 4 Crash," it described a single vehicle accident, citing excessive speed as the likely cause. The driver, whose name was not released, was in critical condition at the regional hospital. There was no mention of a witness. No mention of a 7-year-old girl who had stood vigil in the cold. No mention of a black sedan. It was as if she and Alara had never been there at all. The official story was written, neat and simple, erasing the messy, inconvenient truth her daughter had tried to offer. The system hadn't just failed. It had actively rewritten reality. That evening, Anya felt a desperate need to do something. Anything. After putting Alara to bed, she drove back to the crash site. The motorcycle was gone, but the scar on the landscape remained. Broken branches, gouged earth, a dark stain on the soil. Under the cold glare of her headlights, she walked the shoulder of the road, her eyes scanning the ground. She didn't know what she was looking for. A piece of chrome, a fragment of a headlight, some proof that another car had been there. Her light caught a glint of metal nestled in the weeds, just beyond the oil stain. It wasn't from the bike. It was small and silver, intricately shaped. She picked it up. It was a cufflink, heavy and cold in her palm. It was fashioned in the shape of a stylized wolf's head, its eyes tiny chips of garnet. It was expensive. It was out of place. And it was proof. It was a tiny, solid piece of the truth. The days that followed were thick with a quiet dread. Anya called the sheriff's department twice. The first time, a dispatcher put her on hold for 10 minutes before telling her Sheriff Brody was unavailable. The second time, Brody himself answered. His voice was laced with irritation. "Ma'am, I told you the case is closed. It was a straightforward accident." Anya's hands trembled as she held the phone. "But I found something at the scene. Cufflink. It doesn't belong to the biker. My daughter saw a black car, a nice car. This could be from the driver." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Brody spoke again, his voice was low and stripped of its folksy charm. It was cold steel. "You need to be careful, ma'am. People get ideas in their heads. They start seeing conspiracies where there's just bad luck. It would be a shame for a single mother to get a reputation as a troublemaker. You understand what I'm saying?" "Let it go." The line went dead. It wasn't advice, it was a threat. Fear, acrid and suffocating, settled over Anya. She was a nobody in this town. A waitress and a cleaner, living in a cheap apartment, raising a child on her own. Who was she to challenge the sheriff? Who was she to challenge a story that everyone had already accepted? She looked at the cufflink sitting on her kitchen counter, the silver wolf seeming to mock her with its silent, inanimate confidence. It represented a truth she was too powerless to defend. That night, Alara had a nightmare. She woke up screaming, her small body rigid with terror. Anya rushed to her side, holding her as she sobbed. "The car, Mommy!" she cried. "It came back. The man was looking for us." Anya's blood ran cold. The threat wasn't just to her reputation. It was to her child's safety, her peace of mind. The town that was supposed to be their home now felt like a cage, its bars forged from indifference and intimidation. The official report remained unchanged. The biker, whose name they learned was David Rhino Taggart, lay in a coma, his future uncertain. The narrative was set in stone. A reckless man had caused his own misfortune. Anya felt trapped, her daughter's trauma and her own evidence silenced by a single, chilling phone call. The system hadn't just looked away. It had actively covered its eyes and ears, leaving them utterly alone. 300 miles away, in a clubhouse that smelled of worn leather, stale beer, and motor oil, a man named Forge took a call. Forge was the president of the Iron Sentinels Motorcycle Club, and his face looked like a roadmap of hard miles and harder decisions. He listened, his knuckles white around the phone, his expression hardening from concern to granite. The man on the other end of the line was a club prospect, a probate, calling from the hospital waiting room. He's not responsive, Prez. The doctors, they're not saying much. The cops already closed the report. Said he lost control. Forge's eyes narrowed. Rhino doesn't lose control. Not on that road. He knows it better than anyone. He had ridden that stretch of Route 4 with Rhino a dozen times. Rhino wasn't a speed demon. He was a master of his machine, a rider whose movements were as precise and deliberate as a surgeon's. Something's not right, Forge said, his voice a low rumble. Send me the police report and pictures of the bike. Everything you can get. An hour later, the files arrived in his inbox. Forge opened the photos of the wreck. He didn't look at the crumpled metal or the shattered lights. He looked at the details. The angle of the impact on the front fork. The specific pattern of the road rash along the side of the gas tank. The way the handlebars were bent. His jaw tightened. This wasn't a low-side slide from taking a curve too fast. The damage was all wrong. It was the signature of a pit maneuver, a forced impact from the side, designed to send a bike into an uncontrollable spin. Someone had run his brother off the road. He then read the official report. Single vehicle. Excessive speed. No other parties involved. The words were a blatant fiction, a lazy, insulting dismissal of a man's life. Then he saw the last file. It was a photo the prospect had snapped with his phone. It was of a small, mud-streaked piece of pink wool, something the nurse had found tucked into Rhino's riding glove. And there was a note from the prospect. A little girl found him, stayed with him till the ambulance came. Her mom said she saw another car. Cops told her she was imagining things. Forge stared at the picture of the pink wool. A child. A child had stood by his brother when no one else would. A child had told the truth and been silenced. A switch flipped inside him. The Iron Sentinels were not a gang. They were a brotherhood bound by a strict code. They were veterans, mechanics, and small business owners. They paid their taxes, they obeyed the law, and they held themselves to a higher standard. Their first rule was simple: we protect our own. But their unwritten, sacred creed was even simpler: we answer the call. And the call was not just the cry of a fallen brother. It was the whispered, dismissed truth of an innocent child. This was no longer just about Rhino. It was about a system that had failed, a truth that had been buried, and a little girl who had been threatened for her courage. Forge stood up and walked to the large corkboard that dominated one wall of the clubhouse. On it was a map, crisscrossed with routes and marked with the locations of every Sentinel chapter in the region. He picked up a red pin. "This is an Omega run," he said to his sergeant-at-arms, his voice leaving no room for argument. An Omega run was their highest state of alert, reserved for the gravest of threats to the club or its principals. It was a call to mobilize every single member. Get everyone on the horn. 3 states. I want a head count by midnight. We ride at dawn. The mission was no longer about retribution. It was about correction. They would not bring violence. They would bring light. They would bring a truth so loud and undeniable that it could not be ignored. The mobilization began not with a roar, but with a ripple of quiet, digital communication. 2103. Forge's initial text message went out to the 5 chapter presidents under his command. The message was simple: Omega, Planefield. Dawn. Within minutes, the network came alive. Encrypted chat groups buzzed with confirmations. Phone trees were activated. A cascade of information flowed with disciplined precision. Sergeants-at-arms confirmed road-ready member counts with their presidents. Road captains began plotting convergent routes, calculating fuel stops and rendezvous points with logistical exactitude. There was no panic, no chaotic scramble. It was the methodical activation of a system built for this exact purpose. 2217. The first headcount came in, 57 riders confirmed. By 2330, The number had climbed to 112. By midnight, it stood at 157. Men from 3 states, mechanics wiping grease from their hands, construction workers leaving night shifts, accountants closing laptops, all moved with a singular purpose. They checked tire pressure, topped off oil and polished chrome, not for show, but as a ritual of preparation. These were not weapons they were readying, but instruments. Instruments of presence. Meanwhile, a different kind of mobilization was underway. A sentinel who worked in private security made a discreet call to Sarah Jenkins, a young, hungry reporter at a regional news station, known for digging into stories the local paper wouldn't touch. The tip was anonymous and sparse. Route 4 motorcycle crash. Police report is wrong. There's a witness, a 7-year-old girl. The sheriff threatened her mother. Ask him about the black sedan. And ask him about the Wolf's Head cufflink. The line went dead. Sarah Jenkins felt a familiar jolt of adrenaline. She pulled up the official report. It was thin, almost insultingly so. She made a call to a contact at the state forensics lab, asking for a favor to run a search on high-end custom jewelry, specifically cufflinks matching that description. For a clock. In garages and sheds across 3 states, engines began to turn over. The initial sound was a series of staggered, individual coughs and sputters in the pre-dawn cold. Then, one by one, they settled into a low, synchronized rumble. The sound grew not in volume, but in breadth, a bass note that seemed to emanate from the very earth. 5:30. The first 2 groups converged at a gas station 50 miles outside of Planefield. 40 bikes rolled in from the north, 30 from the west. They moved without fanfare, filling their tanks in near silence. The only sounds the click of fuel nozzles and the low hum of their engines. They arranged themselves in a staggered riding formation, a disciplined column of chrome and steel. Forge rode at the point, his face set. He had the photos of the crash scene on his phone, the tire track analysis from a club brother who was a retired state trooper, and a high-resolution image of the cufflink. They were building a case, not a war party. 6:45. Sarah Jenkins got a call back from her forensics contact. The Wolf's Head cufflink was part of a limited edition set made by a luxury jeweler in the city. Only 50 were ever produced. The jeweler's client list was confidential, but her contact had a name, cross-referenced from an insurance appraisal database. The name was Marcus Thorne, Planefield's town manager. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. 7:15. The final contingent of riders joined the main column on the highway overlooking the town. The number was now 157. 157 motorcycles, stretching back nearly half a mile. They cut their engines, and an expectant silence fell over the ridge. Below them, the town of Planefield was just waking up, unaware of the quiet storm that had gathered on its horizon. Forge gave the signal. 157 engines roared to life in a single, deafening chorus. They began the slow, deliberate descent into the town, not as a mob, but as a single, unified body, intent on delivering a reckoning built of procedure, evidence, and overwhelming, undeniable truth. The first sign that something was different about this Tuesday morning in Planefield was the sound. It started as a low, distant hum, a vibration felt more than heard, easily mistaken for a passing freight train. But it didn't fade. It grew, deepening into a ground-shaking rumble that rattled windows in the diner where Anya was pouring coffee and made the flag in front of the town hall tremble on its pole. People stepped out of shops, their faces tilted toward the highway, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension in their eyes. Then they saw them. Cresting the hill at the edge of town was a river of steel and black leather. It wasn't a chaotic swarm, but a disciplined, 2x2 formation, moving at precisely the speed limit. The iron sentinels descended into Planefield, their engines a synchronized, percussive roar that was both intimidating and strangely beautiful. They did not tear through the streets. They flowed. They obeyed every traffic light, used their turn signals, and yielded to pedestrians. Their progress was slow, inexorable, and utterly lawful. The sheer number of them was staggering. The column snaked through the town's main street, a procession that seemed to have no end. Sheriff Brody's cruiser was parked outside the courthouse, and he emerged, his face paling as he took in the scale of the arrival. This was not a handful of disgruntled bikers. This was an army. Yet they were a silent army. No one revved their engine. No one shouted. Their faces, many of them etched with the lines of military service, were impassive and stern. They converged on the town square, the epicenter of Planefield's civic life. One by one, in a practiced, fluid motion, they pulled into parking spaces, filling every available spot around the square, then along the adjacent streets. The sound of 157 engines being cut, one after another, was a wave of descending silence, leaving a vacuum that was more profound than the previous noise. They dismounted. They removed their helmets. And they stood. They lined the sidewalks, stood by the war memorial, and gathered on the courthouse steps. They did not block doorways. They did not obstruct traffic. They simply occupied the space, their presence a silent, collective statement. They were big men, dressed in the intimidating armor of their club, but their stillness was what was most unsettling. They were a living, breathing wall of judgment. The townspeople watched from windows and doorways, their morning routines forgotten. They saw not a threat, but a question directed at the heart of their town's authority. Anya, her shift at the diner abandoned, stood across the street, her hand over her mouth, watching the impossible unfold. She saw the patch on their backs, a sentinel's helmet over a crossed hammer and wrench, and understood. They were here for the man in the hospital. They were here for the truth. The monthly Planefield Town Council meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. The agenda was crushingly mundane. A zoning variance for a new porch, a budget proposal for road salt, a debate over holiday decorations. Town manager Marcus Thorne sat at the head of the long table, looking polished and confident in his tailored suit. Sheriff Brody stood near the door, his face a blotchy red, trying to project an air of control that he clearly did not feel. The council chamber, usually populated by a handful of sleepy residents, was packed. Sarah Jenkins was in the front row, her camera operator beside her. The back of the room was a silent phalanx of leather vests and impassive faces. Forge and 3 of his chapter presidents had taken seats in the public gallery. They looked like mountains crammed into chairs built for hills. The meeting began, Thorne's voice smooth and practiced as he discussed the zoning variance. But the tension in the room was a palpable force. Every person in the room was aware of the 150 men standing silently outside. After 10 minutes of procedural drone, the public comment period opened. Sarah Jenkins stood up. Sarah Jenkins, Channel 8 News. A question for Sheriff Brody. Regarding the motorcycle accident on Route 4 last week, your report concluded it was a single-vehicle incident. Were you aware of a witness, a 7-year-old girl, who reported seeing a black sedan flee the scene? Brody's face tightened. We investigated thoroughly. There was no evidence to support that claim. Thorne shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Before Sarah could ask a follow-up, Forge stood. He was not a large man by his club's standards, but his presence filled the room. He walked to the public lectern, moving with a quiet deliberation that commanded attention. My name is John Forge Kincaid. I am president of the Iron Sentinels Motorcycle Club. The man in that crash is my brother, David Taggart. His voice was calm, a low baritone that carried easily through the silent room. We conducted our own investigation. He placed a file on the lectern. This is a forensic analysis of the road markings, conducted by a retired state police accident reconstructionist. It shows clear evidence of a lateral force vector. In plain English, he was hit from the side. Pushed, he then held up a large, glossy photograph for the room to see. It was a close-up of the wolf's head cufflink. This was found at the scene. It did not belong to our brother. His bike has no silver, no chrome wolves, and he does not own a French cuff shirt in his life. A murmur went through the crowd. Marcus Thorne's face had gone from polished confidence to a waxy, artificial calm. He tugged at the cuff of his left sleeve, a small, nervous gesture. Forge continued, his voice even and methodical. We also spoke to every trucking company whose vehicles passed through this area between 7 o'clock and 8 a.m. that day. Took us 48 hours. We found a driver whose forward-facing dash camera was recording. He nodded to one of his men in the back, who approached the council's large monitor with a laptop. A video file appeared on the screen. The footage was grainy, stamped with the time and date. It showed the winding stretch of Route 4. A black motorcycle, Rhino's bike, came into view, traveling at a steady speed. Then, a black sedan surged from behind, swerving aggressively into the motorcycle's lane. The impact was brutally swift. The bike wobbled violently and then was gone, disappearing into the ditch. The sedan paused for a moment, and then sped away. "Freeze frame and zoom on the plate," Forge said. The image froze. The license plate was magnified. Clear as day, it read Taungruan. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. Every eye turned to Marcus Thorne. He was staring at the screen, his mask of composure shattered, his face a canvas of pure, unadulterated panic. He instinctively glanced down at his right wrist, at the empty buttonhole on the cuff of his expensive shirt. The revelation was absolute, undeniable, and delivered not with a shout, but with the cold, hard weight of documented fact. The immediate aftermath was a study in contrasts. Outside, in the town square, the 150 members of the Iron Sentinels remained perfectly still, their silence a powerful, looming presence. Inside the council chamber, chaos erupted. Marcus Thorne shot to his feet, stammering denials, his voice high and thin. Sheriff Brody, his face the color of ash, moved toward Forge, sputtering about unauthorized evidence and tampering with an investigation. He was stopped not by a biker, but by the quiet, firm voice of Sarah Jenkins's editor, who had arrived with 2 state troopers. "Sheriff, I think you need to stand down," the editor said, holding up his phone. "We forwarded this video to the state police an hour ago. They are taking over the investigation." The troopers moved past Brody, their expressions grim and professional, and approached the town manager's table. Thorne crumpled back into his chair, a broken man, as they placed him in handcuffs. The click of the cuffs echoed in the stunned silence of the room. The arrest was public, legal, and irrefutable. As Thorne was led out, he refused to look at the crowd, his gaze fixed on the floor. Brody stood frozen, a monument to his own dereliction of duty, as a state police captain informed him he was being suspended, pending a full internal investigation into obstruction of justice. The system, so quick to protect its own, was now being forced to correct itself under the bright, unforgiving light of public scrutiny. Forge gathered his papers from the lectern, his face betraying no emotion. His job was done. He had not come for vengeance, but for accountability, and it had been delivered. As he and his men filed out of the chamber, the townspeople in the gallery parted to let them pass, their faces a mixture of awe and gratitude. Outside, Forge gave a short, sharp nod. The signal rippled through the silent ranks. In perfect unison, the Iron Sentinels put on their helmets, mounted their bikes, and started their engines. The sound was not a roar of triumph, but a solemn, powerful declaration. They rolled out of town as they had come in disciplined formation, leaving behind a community irrevocably changed. Anya watched them go, tears streaming down her face. One of the last bikers to leave, a man with kind eyes and a graying beard, stopped in front of her. He reached into his vest and pulled out a small, folded envelope. "This is for the little witness," he said, his voice rough but gentle. "The club set up a fund for her education. Courage like that should be rewarded." He placed the envelope in her hand and then rode off to join his brothers. Later that afternoon, Anya got a call from the hospital. David Rhino Taggart had woken up. His first question, the nurse said, was about a little girl with a pink scarf. Dignity was being restored not just for Rhino but for Anya and Alara. The truth they had carried alone was now the town's own, a shared burden and a shared path toward healing. 1 year later, the town of Planefield was different. The change was not just in the new, more diligent sheriff who now ran the department, or in the transparent way the new town manager conducted council meetings. The change was deeper, woven into the fabric of the community itself. The town square, once a place of silent, fearful witness, now hosted a monthly community barbecue. The first one had been organized by Anya, a way to say thank you. It had since become a town tradition. A new plaque was affixed to the base of the war memorial, right where the sentinels had stood. It didn't mention the club by name. It simply read, "In honor of those who stand for the truth, especially when it is quietest." The Iron Sentinels Omega Run became the stuff of local legend. It also became an annual event, but of a different sort. Every autumn, on the anniversary of their ride, the club returned to Planefield for the Sentinels Shield charity ride. Hundreds of bikers from all over the region now participated, their entry fees going to a new non-profit organization called Alara's Watch, a fund dedicated to providing legal aid and support for vulnerable witnesses in rural communities. The program was Anya's idea, a way to ensure that no other parent or child would ever feel as alone and dismissed as they had. The ride was a joyous, thunderous celebration of integrity, culminating in the town barbecue, where bikers and townspeople mingled, sharing food and stories. Alara was no longer the silent, haunted child. She was 8 years old, bright and confident, her laughter a frequent sound in the town square. She was known not as the poor little girl who found a biker, but as the girl who spoke up. She carried the weight of that day not as a burden, but as a source of quiet strength. She still drew constantly, her pictures of unicorns now joined by detailed, smiling portraits of burly men on motorcycles. The ripple effects of her small act of courage had spread further than anyone could have imagined, reforming systems and restoring a town's faith in itself. On the afternoon of the second annual charity ride, Alara sat on a park bench with a large man whose gentle smile was framed by a formidable beard. A long, thin scar ran along his temple, the only visible reminder of his ordeal. David Rhino Taggart was fully recovered, his motorcycle rebuilt. He visited Planefield often, not as a victim returning to a place of trauma, but as a friend returning home. Alara handed him a piece of paper. It was a new drawing, her best one yet. In it, a towering knight in black, shining armor stood with a massive shield, its surface emblazoned with the image of a sentinel's helmet. Huddled safely behind the knight's leg, peeking out at the world with wide, unafraid eyes, was a small girl in a pink coat. "That's you," she said, pointing to the knight. "And that's me." Rhino looked at the drawing, his throat tight with an emotion too profound for words. He saw the truth of it, the immense, lawful strength that had been mobilized to protect the smallest, most vulnerable voice. He saw how the simple, honest courage of one had awakened the disciplined, protective honor of many. "You got it exactly right, kid," he said, his voice thick. "Exactly right. The legacy was not one of fear or revenge, but of restoration. It was the enduring lesson that sometimes the most powerful force for justice is not a weapon, but a witness who refuses to be silenced, and the community that finally learns to listen."